On the eve of Stalin's death, Kerensky, at that time in the United States, in a conversation with an Israeli historian, points out that the accusation of anti-Semitism directed at the Soviet Union in those years is just an invention of the Cold War. 716 Yes, this is the turning point, and to understand it, we ought to return to the atmosphere of those years. It's a Cold War that can turn into a nuclear holocaust at any moment, and that knows no limits in the ideological sphere. From both sides they exclaim that the other side is plagued by anti-Semitism. The trial and death sentences in the United States of the Rosenbergs, communists and Jews accused of treason and espionage in service to Moscow, happen almost simultaneously to the trials and death sentences that in the socialist camp strike against Zionist figures accused of treason and espionage in service to Tel Aviv and Washington. Suspected of disloyalty and called upon to provide clear proof of patriotism, in both cases the Jewish community is subjected to more or less explicit pressure and blackmail. The climate of suspicion was no less oppressive in the United States than in the USSR. It's not easy to imagine that time nowadays, when everyone is aware of the special relationship between Washington and Tel Aviv. But at the start of the Cold War the situation was quite different. Often the whites-only or Caucasian-only urban centers continued to exclude Jews as well, considered just as stupid as blacks. As late as 1959, the Anti-Defamation League felt it necessary to denounce the harassment suffered by Jews because of the persistence of that practice. 717 Overall, the years of the 1940s and 1950s constituted a politically traumatic era for the Jewish minority. 718 Still active were the political circles that linked Judaism and communism, that considered Jews as foreigners on American soil and collaborators with the mortal Soviet enemy, and that, alongside the writings by Henry Ford, even republished the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. 719 Certainly after Auschwitz, that is after the revelation of the horrors that anti-Semitism would lead to, this could no longer continue to enjoy the same sympathy as before. Nevertheless, the threat represented by anti-Jewish prejudice was far from disappearing. In 1953, Jews constituted the majority of the laid-off employees, or those transferred to other positions, in the radar laboratories in Fort Monmouth, New Jersey. 720 According to the French communist leader Jacques Duclos, active in denouncing the persecution endured by the Rosenbergs in the United States, anti-Semitism didn't play any role in the trials that in Czechoslovakia accurately target Zionist traitors in service to the war policies of Washington. 721 Dramatically opposed is the version that the enemies of the Soviet Union are determined to spread. In rejecting the accusation of anti-Semitism launched by Duclos at the United States, the American Jewish Committee unhesitatingly pronounces itself in favor of the execution of the Rosenbergs and opposes any degree of clemency. Everyone in the United States must know that the American Jewish ranks feel only horror at the sight of the spies and communist agitators. 722 It's not by chance that among McCarthy's collaborators are two Jews, committed not just to fighting communism, but also in demonstrating the patriotic loyalty of their community. 723 It's not just a matter of defending the United States from the accusation of anti-Semitism. The FBI elaborates a plan that is turned over to a Jewish lawyer. He is entrusted with a very specific task, win over the confidence of the Rosenbergs in prison and try to persuade them that, in truth, the USSR is an anti-Semitic power with intentions of exterminating the Jews. Once dispelled of their illusions toward the Soviet Union, the Rosenbergs could take advantage of clemency in exchange for an appeal to Jews of all countries to quit the communist movement and seek to destroy it. 724 Ineffective in the case of the two communist militants who courageously faced the electric chair on June 19, 1953. The blackmail achieves the desired result on other occasions. In the intimidating atmosphere of the Cold War, it isn't that surprising that some of the most respected Jewish intellectuals in the nation, including some of those previously on the left, felt obligated to seek protection or even change sides. 725. No small number of them agreed to denounce Stalin's and the Soviet Union's anti-Semitism. However, before this black legend takes hold, it comes across a number of difficulties. Still in 1949, we see one of the Cold War paladins, Churchill, repeatedly make a remarkable comparison between Nazism and communism. The first was less dangerous, given that it could rely only on Herrenvolk pride and anti-Semitic hatred. That's not the case with the second, which can count on a church of communist faithful, whose missionaries are in every country and in every people. Therefore, on one side we have the stoking of national and racial hatred, from which there's the hatred directed at the Jewish people. On the other side, a denunciation of universalism, although it's instrumentally exploited by an expansionist, imperialist design. 726 may be even more significant is the speech by Adorno in 1950. In publishing his research about the authoritarian personality, he highlights the correlation between anti-Semitism and anti-communism and then adds, "In recent years all propaganda organs in America were dedicated to developing anti-communism in the sense of an irrational terror, and probably few people, apart from the followers of the party line, are able to resist the incessant ideological pressure." 727 At this time, far from being directed at Stalin and his followers, the accusation of anti-Semitism continues to target the anti-communists. Unbalanced from the start, the balance of forces between the two sides of the Cold War increasingly sees the West prevail both at the military level, as well as with respect to the ideological offensive and its multimedia firepower. Nowadays, only one of the two opposing accusations of anti-Semitism remains standing, the other has been lost even in memory. It must be added that, aside from Stalin, that accusation reaches his successors, starting with Khrushchev, who is also said to have shown signs, it's not really known why, of evident anti-Semitism. 728 Nevertheless, quote in 1973 Jews, who constituted 0.9% of the Soviet population, represented 1.9% of all university students in the country, 6.1% of all scientific personnel, and 8.8% of all scientists. 729 unquote. Moreover, a British historian who's also determined to label Stalin as anti-Semitic, starting from at least the 1930s, not only recognized that the people frequented by the Soviet leader, and even many of his most intimate associates, were of Jewish origin, but adds that in 1937, Jews formed the majority in the government. 730 It's very hard for these figures and this empirical research to be cited in support of the thesis of Stalin's and Soviet anti-Semitism.